multiple.
It is going to be backwards, but
I think it flips
will you
it.
upload the slides?
Yeah,
Okay.
I haven't done that for the first lecture yet, but I do that after each lecture. I'll upload the slides so you can study from them as well. But you'll see that I wrote in this and highlighted it, maybe write notes to myself. But also there's some times where I'll draw directly on top of the pictures to help me.
You guys can go print off the book, the link,
Oh.
and that's what I did, and so I can annotate as we go, because a lot of stuff of what you're saying, they don't include in here.
Yeah.
And it's way more information, so I can add a little note or something.
Good, and there's different ways of, reading the text. I think that a textbook, obviously, you read differently than if it's a book that you're reading for fun or for leisure. And the way that I like to read this is kind of sometimes the end of the chapter first. And these, sometimes I tend to skip these where it'll be like religion and mythology. Just kind of like highlighted text, whereas maybe this is a deep dive into their mythology. But I'll read the chapter and then I'll go back to this. Oh, that makes sense. Those are those names that I heard about, like in today, Inanni and Nana and Uruk. It'll tell you a little bit about Ishtar, those. And then another way, I think, to read the text is to stop and words that you don't know, words that seem significant, highlight them, go back to them, especially. It's kind of like that Cornell method, too, of not just writing your notes, but rewriting your notes, reviewing your notes, and reciting your notes. Kind of like when you do flashcards for studying something and there's vocab. This summer, I got some good feedback that the tests that I gave were not overly difficult. They weren't too challenging, but they also weren't the easiest. But some students had no idea how to study. So I'm going to make it more approachable this semester. That was good feedback. I'm going to make sure that not only the notes that you take in class, but then before we take a test, we'll do a review. And so you'll kind of know better. It's a lot of material. We're covering 5-6 chapters at a time when we take a test. It's a lot of material to be responsible and accountable for all of that. So it's just a couple of thoughts about the book. And also, reading it beforehand, I think, really helps, but then reviewing it at some point as well, so that the material is familiar with you. I think it's really interesting material, but it is dense. It's denser than if you were just to watch a short TikTok or YouTube video about some of these art
That's what I
movements.
struggle with. I do like the reading at first, but then having to go back and review, that's always hardest for me.
Going back and reviewing, I think is
Or
helpful
reviewing,
because it kind of
yeah.
confirms what you know and what you don't know. Like, oh, I remember Dustin talking about that scene before, and this was something that clicked with me immediately. I'm good on that. This didn't click. This didn't make as much sense. There's a succession of power that we'll talk about today, and it is confusing. It's kind of a back and forth. Sumerian, Akkadians, Babylonians, and then Assyrians, and then Neo-Babylonian. That succession is something that you want to take notes on and make sure that you recite it, review it, because it isn't just, it's not intuitive. It's not just something that you easily remember. Who's taking World Civ right now? Anyone in World Civ? Are we overlapping so far? Kind of.
Cool.
Is this week, are you talking about Mesopotamia, ancient Near East? Yeah. Next week, Egypt, Greece.
Well, we're kind of, for my class, we're in Egypt right now too, and then
Oh,
next
okay.
week we're doing East Asia.
Okay, so it's kind of just flipped. Yeah, you do Egypt, then East Asia. We're doing East Asia, then Egypt. I think it's cool because you're learning about it. You'll probably see an overlap in some of the rulers' names. You might need to know. Do you need to know dates?
I don't know.
The way that I teach it, I don't expect dates, but I like that you can know a succession, right? So chronologically, but not necessarily pinpoint date. I don't think that's as important.
Thank you, because that was always
It's a
the
difficult-
worst in history classes.
It's a difficult thing.
They're like, you knew everything, but you didn't remember the right date, so wrong.
Yeah.
That would make me really upset.
Like, to know that the Renaissance happened after the medieval era and before Rococo is important. And, it's the 15th century, it's the 16th century. That's great, but I don't think that you need to know that, Giotto was working at 1410 and Michelangelo made his first piece at 1499. I don't think that's
Thank you. I feel seen.
different historians, different art historians, like to get into graduate school, if you want to get into an art history program, what they'll do is they'll give you that book and say, we're going to test you on 100 images from that book, and you have to know the artist, the title, and the date, and you have to get at least a 90%. Yeah, someone told me that they went for art history. It's different for each school, but this is the woman of Willendorf, mislabeled as the Venus, right? That's not a really accurate description, and I love this. This is this great company called Museon. They make museum quality reproductions, and they try to get, when possible, casts of the original or a scan of the original. And so I'm going to have you pass this around Sans holder, and you can feel in your hand and look, and I just want you to kind of notice
Is that
the
what the
texture.
stone color would look like?
Yeah, this was this limestone,
Right.
and this was the kind of natural coloring of it, and it's kind of aged and patinaed. But pass it around, feel the texture, imagine what it must have felt like to own this or to create this, kind of looking at it, and this is one view that we didn't get. The buttocks, the booty. Is a really interesting piece, and I think it's great to kind of just get a sense of the scale and the texture. We can't always do this, and obviously we would never be able to hold the original. If we did, we'd probably have to put gloves on and wear a mask or something, or like just see it from across the room. You can't touch art. We know that, right? When we go to a museum, you're not allowed to touch it as much as we want to, Donna. We want to touch it.
Why
like
are
I'm always
you
like,
looking at me?
because I'm saying we want to. Like, I agree. So pass this around, take a look at this. And one of the questions that I want you to think about today is, and write this down, what is an expectation of living in a community? If you can think about today versus some of these first civilizations, what is an expectation of you living in a community or living in a civilization, right? How do you agree to be a good, upstanding member in a civilization? Who gets to decide this? And what governs this? Why do we agree to do this? So what are your thoughts? And you can probably think even about, we're living in a community, we're living in a civilization here at Lyon College. Who lives on campus? Have you read the student handbook from cover to cover? Who's read the student handbook from cover to cover? Do you just hope that you're abiding by it and like, we'll find out if I break one of these rules, right? But what sorts of things do you or imagine is in that student handbook guiding your like actions? What's that?
Don't murder.
Don't murder. Like that one's probably not even in there, but it probably should be. It maybe rule one is like, okay, follow the rules of society, and then also all of these ones. Like, so it like, we're gonna assume murder is like one of those things. Yeah, like don't murder your roommate. Shit. Dang it. What am I gonna do now? What do you think's in it, Michaela?
I'm bored.
Let's just say for living, not even, we're not talking academically, just for living.
Taking care of community spaces.
Yes, that's a good one, right? I imagine something is in there along those lines. Like if there are, hello, this is World Art 1. Did you recently add? What's your name? Elijah? I'm Dustin. Nice to meet you. Come on in, have a seat. So, communal spaces. I bet that's in there, right? Take care of them. Clean up after yourself. What else?
Are we just doing like kind of like in general? Because I feel like context matters where you're at in a specific region, or maybe just kind of are you talking about like overall for like
Overall.
I mean, don't commit
Specifically,
murder.
yeah, specifically for Lyon College though, in the student handbook, what sorts of things you think are in there?
No destruction of property.
No destruction of property. That's in there, right? If it's not yours, don't break it. Ask to use it, right?
Don't
What
hurt
else?
people with
Don't-
your words, and like,
Ooh, yeah.
you know, like no slurs, no insults, like
Do you think it gets that
hate
specific?
speech.
Do you think it gets that specific?
Probably it's a lot of pages.
I'm giving y'all assignment. It sounds like y'all have to read the student code of the
Um,
student handbook
I feel
code
like
of
it's
conduct.
common sense.
What if I read that like 3 years ago?
That's fine. Do you remember any of it? No. Does this make you nervous, or do you think you're okay? Why do you think you're okay if you haven't read a student handbook?
Because it's common sense.
A lot of it's common sense. Do you agree with that? So then why do we need a student handbook? Why do people go to the trouble of printing it and updating it? SGA, I believe, even votes on it. Is anyone in SGA?
I was.
You were in, was anyone else in SGA before, last year, year before? You were? Did they talk about like rules and regulations
There
or?
was a committee that like reads the Constitution and they edit it.
Yeah, so every year they decide like, is this a good fit? Is there anything we need to take away from this? Is there anything that we need to add to it? If it's common sense, maybe we don't need a student handbook. Maybe we don't need, well, why would we need one in a community? Lacey?
Well, same reason why there's a warning on a stroller that says don't fold it with the child.
Some people don't have, they maybe lack that common sense, or someone wasn't
Very
thinking
much
and they
so.
did it, and then it's like, well, now we need to put this on there.
One person's
right?
common sense
The
isn't the same
latter.
as another.
Exactly, like now every coffee cup in the United States says caution, contents are hot. Really? They're hot? I didn't know that. But it is an interesting premise that as a community, we get to decide the rules and the regulation. But who decides? All right, so this is the next question. Who decides what the rules and the regulations are?
Authority.
Authority, right. So that's true. Do you think that that person who is in authority, what might their title be that could tell us what the rules and regulations are? What about at Lyon College? What's their title called? President, or also maybe
Dean of students.
Dean of Students, the provost, yeah. They come up with the rules. Do
Mhm.
students have input?
Yes.
Yeah. Now what about in one of these ancient civilizations? Who's the authority figure?
Shaman?
A shaman, a king?
Good word.
Probably, that's great because you're all both right. Probably the first kings
Let's
were
go.
priests. And they were priests and then they were kings. There were priest kings. And so there was a line of succession. But who gave them the right?
God.
Thank you. That's what we'll learn today. So this is the region. We call this Mesopotamia. It comes to us from the ancient Greek words. Does Potamia sound familiar? Is there a word that sounds like Potamia? Hippopotamus, right? It's the same word.
What?
Land. Land. Meso, we learned this like, there was Paleolithic, Old Stone, Mesolithic, Middle Stone Age, and Neolithic, New Stone Age. So Mesopotamia just means middle land, and it's this.
So Meso's middle, Potamia's land.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So like hippopotamus, it's on land. They need to distinguish that it's water and land.
Doesn't it mean the land between rivers?
Well, this describes this. This was the Greek name for this region right here, but more specifically, the etymology comes from. That's the button I'm not supposed to push. I gotta remember. I got my clicker. This right here, the Euphrates
Mhm.
and the Tigris rivers right here. This was also nicknamed the Fertile Crescent.
Yes.
This region right here. So it's modern day Turkey, Syria, mostly centered in Iraq, a bit of Iran as well. You can see the mountains in the east create a sort of natural fortification. So it's sort of a protected area. It was hard to conquer unless it does happen, which we'll see, but the Assyrians and the Persians. Thank you. What was it like holding this in your hand? Someone care to share? Heavy.
Heavy texture, and you can see way more details. I can tell that there's fingers.
Yeah,
now.
the hands are great to see on here because you missed that in the photo. We looked at the image.
I thought it was
I'll post the
clothing.
slides from Tuesday. Yeah, it looked like clothing perhaps, but when you see it, you see all the
The
naughty
fingers.
bits that we said before. We called the breasts and the pelvic area, and not the word that you said. But I love it. It's great because you
I
can
thought
say
it was
it.
being PG.
I can't. Yeah, I mean, I guess there's worse words
Yeah.
on the spectrum of words to describe that area. But this experience is kind of what I want you to think about when we're looking at these pieces. A lot of times it's like it's a different way of engaging and countering. All right, and that's why I like to show you the scale a lot of times. Is that would make a difference if that was 4 feet tall instead of 4 inches. It changes the purpose, the need of it. But this region now is generally very hot, arid. It isn't the Fertile
I thought it
Crescent
was
anymore.
sandy over there.
It
that
is
not right?
sandy.
Okay.
Now it is.
But back
see,
in the day.
in the Mesolithic era, there was flooding,
Mm-hmm.
and then moving into the Neolithic era, people started to congregate in areas where it was easier to live. So this was a very hospitable land to be able to start farming and agriculture, moving away from hunters, gatherers to an agrarian society, which gives us specialization too. So that all of a sudden somebody could be a farmer, animal husbandry, raising crops, raising animals, and that was trade as well. They're like, another civilization would look at the Sumerians. So this is in Sumer, which is in this region. So the ancient Assyrians, we'll talk about, kind of come from this area here. These are some of the sites. Babylon, which is in...
That's in the Bible, right?
Yeah, a lot of these that we're talking about today are biblical. Some of the names too. Nineveh, the Assyrians. We'll talk about some of the names. Babylon, one of the great. Do you know one of the great Babylon kings? That's in the Bible.
No.
He's the second. Starts with an N.
No.
Nebuchadnezzar.
Yeah.
So that's we'll talk about.
Is it Noah?
But
Oh.
but we'll see a contemporary counterpart to the idea of Noah, right? That a lot of these, generationally, these stories were passed down, and this region all had a flood story.
I
They're-
haven't read
they're,
the
like,
Bible,
interconnected.
They're
so I don't
interconnected,
understand
yeah.
the stories.
Sumer is here, in modern day York. This is a war-torn area. It always has been. Still to this day it is, but it's in modern day Iraq. And this is a really important piece, one of the most significant pieces in art history. If you look at this piece, how would you say it is similar to some of the cave art that we saw from the Paleolithic era, and how would you say that it's different? Maybe something that's different
It's
about
similar in pictures,
Yeah.
like it's more made of pictures, but it's different as in it's more complex.
Good. It's more complex. There's a narrative here. There's a narrative here. A lot of the Paleolithic art was more just symbolism, and we didn't say like this person's doing this to this, and there's a story.
Yeah, that like this one is telling maybe stuff they will do or like how they will walk around. Like it's more telling about maybe their like culture and like the way of living instead of just being like symbolism.
Exactly. Yeah, so it's kind of giving us a glimpse into the story of how they live and how they organize. As a civilization, who gets to decide? What's the expectation of living in a civilization? The art can tell us. So this is an important piece. It is called the Warka vase for where it was found in Warka, which is now called Warka. It was Uruk, named after the god Uruk. And it was dedicated to Inanna, who was a goddess, this piece was. And it's believed that Inanna is shown in this here, or she is represented by a priestess who would be worshiping her. So we kind of see a connection between the people and their beliefs, the belief system. Another reason that this piece is really important is it is the first known art piece that shows a ground plane. So there's a consistent ground plane. We didn't see that in Paleolithic or Neolithic art. So this is emerging from Neolithic. This is 5,000 years old. The age of this is staggering. 3,300 BCE. It is alabaster, it's a stone. There was not a lot of stone in this region. So we know they had to trade for this. And the Sumerians were the first advanced modern civilization. They lived in Sumer with about 40,000 people. The town I grew up in had 40,000 people in Monroe, Michigan. It's about 45 minutes from Detroit, 30 minutes from Toledo. 40,000 people. We had a lot of rules. We had a lot of laws. They had to codify their laws, their rules. The Sumerians, what else are the Sumerians famous for? Do you know? Not only the first ground plane, language, first written records,
Mhm.
and we can read it. Do you know what that language is called, or the pictograph system that they used?
No, it's
Literally, we talked about this last year.
It's a type of phonetic language. Phonetic is when you have a system of letters. The Phoenicians used a phonetic. It's cuneiform.
Yeah.
Cuneiform.
I'm-
So their written language we can read today. That's not the case for all ancient civilizations. They lived in city-states. So each city agreed, or kind of like what we would describe as a city, and Sumer is one of the cities. Another city-state nearby would have their own organization, their own rules, their own list of ways to be a productive community member. And they worshipped a similar slate of gods. But when another warring faction would take over this region, they would not only assimilate, they would adopt their language. So some of the warring factions that later took control of the Sumerians took their language, took their written record cuneiform. So the Akkadians used
They didn't
cuneiform.
force them to change, but
They didn't change them.
adapted it.
They adopted it as their own.
I think that's very
And
interesting.
they actually figured out a way to translate the way that they spoke into cuneiform. It's very advanced to think that they were doing that 4,000, 5,000 years ago, right? So imagine going to another country and not understanding their language, but being able to adapt your vocabulary to theirs, right? It's an amazing, you have to translate this. So this is an interesting way that this is laid out. So not only does it have a ground plane, right? So this line becomes a system to organize these. It's brilliant. This is the earliest known example of this. Maybe an earlier artist did this. We don't know the artist who made this. This is also really tall. As a vase, it's 3 feet tall. Pretty big vase. So you know this is important. It was dedicated to Inanna, and it was found in this temple that was dedicated to Inanna, who was the moon goddess. This is the Warka vase. It is the first known example of using line for showing a common ground plane, but also the earliest known example of using friezes or registers. That's when we put art and a story within panels, like a comic book uses registers or individual little sections. And we can read that, we can understand that. That's why the same way that you knew that this was a story, like immediately you're like, it's how they lived. I can see there's people walking, there's another one where there's animals walking, boom. It's a pretty sophisticated but easy, almost intuitive way to understand how this is organized. The Sumerians wrote from top to bottom, but from right to left. So that means their art was probably the same way, from top to bottom, right to left, as opposed to the way we read top to bottom, left to right, right? So that makes sense that they're walking this way, right, as opposed to that way. But it is in full circle, so it goes all the way around. These are nude figures, and they are bringing votives. This is important because the next piece we will do is kind of similar to this. And likely what's happening is they're showing why Inanna is good. So the priestess, some believe it's the goddess Inanna is in this, but it could be the priestess, a female, which is also interesting because it shows us how females had an important role in the Sumerian culture. And that then they are bringing these offerings to Inanna. Here they are carrying it, men are carrying it. How do we know they're men? We can see their peepees, you can see their penises right there. And then these are the animals, which would be important for them. It's a commodity. Animals are commodity. They figured out how to breed animal husbandry. They figured out a way to breed them. So other civilizations nearby were like, how did you get the goats all to stay in one place? And then you could eat them. That's brilliant. They're like, well, if you give us some of your stones, because we don't have any stones, we'll teach you how to do it and we'll sell you some goats. Trade. Early civilizations built on trade. Specialization, right? Specialization as well. So you had a priest, you had a priestess, you had someone that was just taking care of animals, you had someone that was just taking care of farming. Since not everybody had to farm, not everybody had to hunt in like the Mesolithic era or the Paleolithic era, then you could get specialization of different roles. And I imagine that one of those roles became artist. And that's why we see a proliferation, a great proliferation first in the Sumerian culture. And so these are two statuettes. They're known as votive statuettes or worshipers. So the idea is that to kind of, one of these ideas to be like a good upstanding member in this civilization, in this community, like you wrote down an idea, like what is an expectation of living in a community? Not only abiding by the rules, but contributing something. So maybe you can contribute something because you're really good at farming. You're a really good artist. You're a great leader. So hey, you're the priest. You're the king. You know, we have to make these designations, but also that you're going to believe the same way that everybody else believes. You don't want to stand out and not believe the same way. And so these votive figures became proxies for people. And so if it was your duty to worship Inanna or Ur, these were at the temple of Eshnunna. In the book, it shows the different characteristics of each of these gods and goddesses in the ancient Mesopotamian civilizations. Did anyone have world religions for their RPH class? World religions? Maybe learned about some of these in ancient Mesopotamia. They're not as like well known, I think. They're not like household names, but a lot of them became adapted to other cultures as well. Like there's a lot of overlap between Ishtar and Athena in Greek culture. So there was a sharing. These two worshipers would be at a burial to worship as a proxy for the person who could no longer worship to that god, to that goddess. And they were carrying little vessels. And there were hundreds of these little vessels that had libations in them, something to give, liquid to give to the god or the goddess. This is something you would do in your life, like pour one out for your dead homie, right? You know what I'm talking about? They were doing that in ancient times. They would pour out a liquid. And so they would find in these temples and these burial sites hundreds of these little vases, not real fanciful ones. The Warka vase is just an amazing one that was probably owned by someone very important to do the same thing, to pour a libation out for one of these gods or goddesses. Donna?
For the worshipers, is it just the statue, or were people like that was their assigned role and they would come there and like just worship for them? I'm confused on that.
Exactly. So like say someone in your family died and you're going to say a prayer for them. You're going to pray to the god or the goddess, right? And you're going to offer out a prayer. You're going to offer out a libation. These are stand-ins. So we can't go every day to visit the gravesite. We can't go every day to the temple. But these votives are for us. They're proxies for us and for our family. And they will do this forever, in perpetuity, for us. They're still there. Well, no, they're not there anymore. Now they're in a museum. But they would still be there in the same place, worshiping for us, offering for us. And what similarities do you see between this? I think there's kind of a new style of art that's emerging, different from what we saw in the Paleolithic period. But what are maybe some similarities between this and like Woman of Willendorf, or one of the cave paintings that we saw of a person? Or remember that horn, the ivory tusk that became that feline part human? What are some similarities between this and some of those pieces?
Their stature.
Stature, yeah. What do you mean by that? Like the pose?
Yeah. How they're standing in a very uniform way.
Yeah, they don't seem lively and full of emotion. They're not really expressive, right? They're kind of like archetypes. What else? I like that.
And the woman is up there, like, has clothes on and stuff, and the woman, what is it?
Woman of Willendorf.
Woman of Willendorf.
She's named that because where she was found in Willendorf, Austria.
It focuses mainly on her body, and that woman looks more like she represents chastity in a way.
Yeah, there is like she is shown covered, but we can see some of her anatomy still revealed. One shoulder is showing and perhaps part of her torso. What else do you notice? Maybe now, what are some differences between this and the Woman of Willendorf, or any of the cave paintings that we saw? Or some differences? What is kind of maybe a new style that's emerging that's different?
I mean, it's all human. There's no animal characteristics.
Faces too. Yeah, we see faces.
Oh.
We didn't really see that. Yeah, that's a great point. And this is a great vocab word, apotropaic. Does anyone know what apotropaic means? Apotropaic means to strike fear in the eyes of the viewer. Apotropaic means to create awe and fear. Those eyes are bugging out. Check them out. They're like
I was just
stylized.
saying that to her. Why are they
Yeah.
so big?
I thought they were like lenses.
There's
They're
two.
glasses.
Well, what? Why might they be? They're wide open, aren't they? Why might they be so big?
The eyes are the window to the soul. I don't know.
I love it. That's great. That's not wrong. That's not a bad hypothesis. Why else
To
might they be
see
so?
into their future, but they're dead. So
Their eyes are important. They can see, and they can see for us. They can see into the future. They can see they're not just now, they're in the future as well. But also because they are alert, right? They're paying attention. They're not asleep. They're not.
Well, they're meant to oversee the. That makes sense.
They're on alert.
Mhm.
They're definitely on alert. But also, if someone comes in there to mess with this, they're going to be scared. So it kind of strikes fear in the person. These are kind of the two main thoughts as to why the eyes are so big. And they've found a lot of these kind of statuettes of worshipers. They're also known as votive statues.
Did that turn off?
Oh, I did. But it might still be recording.
Did it?
And why they are so important is because it kind of gives us, yeah, it's still recording,
Okay.
a
good.
glimpse into what was important, why we decided to make art that looked like this, right? As opposed to art, someone mentioned art about mostly animals in the natural world. This is showing kind of what it means to be an important member, a good member of society. Like, if everybody acted like this, maybe we wouldn't need rules. Maybe if all you little hellions weren't running around breaking all the furniture, we wouldn't have to put a rule in the student handbook that says don't break other people's furniture, right?
Do we know if they were made after like people in the family, or is it like the priests at the time?
This is a great question that people have been studying this exact
Okay,
question.
so no,
There, this is cool because right here, this is kind of an astute observation where these actual people, and this is evidence as to why this might have been, because this could have been a mother, because there's these two little set of baby feet right here. The rest of the figure has broken off. I love that element of this.
That's so
And
cool.
also their stature, not their stature in terms of their pose, but their status in society is different. So there's scale, there's changes in scale. Some of these figures are larger than others, and that can give us evidence that they could be particular people. But then they became to represent an idea of just man, woman, child.
Yeah.
So they could be individual portraits, and if they were at one point, they broadened to become sort of archetypes. This also gives us a sense, I love this, Dr. Saunders would love this, this gives us an indication of what their fashion was like as well. Because we see what the woman was wearing, they're both barefoot, is different what the man was wearing. And he has like this kind of skirt that's made of reeds at the bottom, so woven reeds, and you can see a distinction. It was important, for some reason the artist had to show that. They didn't have to be so specific, but they showed us what the clothing looked like. I love his beard too. I would call it stylized. It's representational because it looks like what it's supposed to represent, like literally representing something. Here's the thing, and I'm representing it. I'm representing a man, but it's stylized. It's not realistic. It doesn't look just like a man. They're kind of playing fast and loose with the rules of what the way the beard looks is very stylized. It becomes like a shape, an abstracted shape. And look at the shoulders and the arms. I think they knew how to carve correctly, but for whatever reason, they were doing it in this style, in this motif, to make it interesting, but to also kind of represent what they were going for
Does
with
he
this.
have clothing up top, or is
He doesn't. He is.
bare chested?
Yeah, because it looks like he has a sleeve that goes to there, but that's a crack. Yeah, he's
Okay.
bare chested, and a lot of these figures were, and perhaps the same reason that this in Egyptian times meant I'm walking on hallowed ground. I'm barefoot. This is a place of respect in a temple.
Do you think she has a boob out? Because if there was,
I do.
Well, but to elaborate on that, if that's a child, do you think maybe because breastfeeding?
Yeah, and it tells us
That
immediately
would make
she's.
so much sense. Like just have it out anyway.
It tells us immediately she's a woman,
Mm-hmm.
right?
True.
From this cultural standpoint. This is an interesting piece as well. This is also laid out in registers. Now this is a recreation. All of this is not how it was found, but this is how it was discovered, just these individual pieces. And they are made of shell and wood was scarce there. They had to trade for wood, and gold and lapis lazuli, which is a rare mineral. To this day, it's only found in Afghanistan. It was only found there as well, so they had to trade for it. In the Renaissance time, it was what they used to paint Mary and Jesus, and it was like this bluish purple. And to this day, it's still a very expensive mineral. It's only found in Afghanistan. Afghanistan is near Iraq, but they had to cross mountains to get to this, so they were trading for this. It's a very beautiful blue. They used it sparingly. You can see it here in this recreation. They would paint things with it. They also used bitumen, which bitumen is like tar. So they found oil and they turned it into glue. So this is essentially, what is it called when you take broken pieces of glass and shell and you glue them together to make an image?
Mosaic.
It's a mosaic. This is an ancient version of a mosaic because they took the pieces of gold and shell and stone, in this case limestone, broke them into small pieces and made an image out of them. This entire thing would be about 3 feet tall. So this section is about 3 foot tall. This entire thing is about 5 foot tall. It's a harp that you could play, but you would sit on it on the back here and you could play this. So this makes sense. It's about 3 foot tall. This is amazing to see a glimpse into how they lived. We already have such a specialization of roles in a civilization that there's someone that just literally plays the harp. And they're not gonna just play some average harp. Like they definitely like made this thing bedazzled. They definitely made it visually and intrinsically very valuable. So the rest of this doesn't exist, but because we have pictures within images, and I love it. You seeing what's happening here? Like, what's going on?
I don't know.
What in the what? What were they? They were doing some good drugs, I think. Like to make
Targeting
this
with the animals for sure.
Disneyfication, right? This is like Aesop's fables, right? Like animals are like parables and
They're doing
metaphors for
human
humans.
stuff.
They're doing human stuff, and perhaps we don't know. We have no idea what this means because you know the Epic of Gilgamesh? Has anyone read part of the Epic of Gilgamesh? Right? Did you read it in high school or in college? Gilgamesh is the ruler. He's the leader, and it's like his narrative. It's just like his origin story. It's the earliest written story that the Sumerians gave to us, and perhaps these are scenes from the Epic of Gilgamesh, personified by animals as opposed to the roles, the encounters. There's a flood scene in the Epic of Gilgamesh. There is outside threats in the Epic of Gilgamesh, but it's ultimately showing like Gilgamesh is heroic. That's why he's our leader. In these registers, basically what it's doing is we have a composition, and this is an individual composition, this is an individual composition. It's splitting the image up so we can read it. This is lost on us, but it would have probably been easy to read for an ancient Sumerian. This is 2550 BCE, and this is 3300 BCE. So I think that there is some similarities, but we're talking about a difference of 1,000 years.
Pretty big difference.
Big difference. And the Sumerians had a long extant as a civilization, just like the Egyptians did, just like the Greeks did. And I think one of the reasons why is this idea of organization. What does it mean to be an important? What does it mean to be in good standing in a community and a civilization? So you had specialization as well. This bull was a common theme as well. So we see bulls here, and this like dude here in the middle, like he's able to like speak to animals and like dance with them.
It looks
It's
like
wild.
they're his kids because
Yeah.
they have the same face.
They do. They do. And like someone that would be able to control animals and herd animals, that's an important role. So that would give them great
And the
qualities.
guy at the bottom
Here-
has a scorpion tail.
Yeah, that's
It's
great. Like Does that mean a
crazy.
scorpion is like a human or a human is like a scorpion? Like, we don't know for sure, but it's like I said, it's like the, Disneyfication of animals to kind of tell us stories about ourselves as humans. And I love this one here because this kind of shows us too what those libations were, those votive figures, because here we see a large vase, we see a smaller vase, and we see some kind of an offering of animals from another animal, which is just creepy as well. But this was in one of the tombs, and these were believed to be important, either rulers, kings, queens, that had these tombs. So this wasn't found in a temple like the other pieces were. These were found in a tomb, intentionally buried with the figures. And so here is, we'll look at this. It's called the Standard of Ur. It's one of the most important pieces in art history. This as an object. And in it, we can see a dude playing a harp. So we know what it looks like. So this, as a recreation,
They're playing the harp in the second picture.
and in the second picture too, here, right here?
No.
No, this one, yeah. It kind of looks like a giant rake, and they're playing the harp. It's amazing. That's why that makes sense that this would be a harp. It's kind of showing how you would use it. And here we see a dude playing a harp, 40 priest, and we see a eunuch, which is a castrated male singer. You have a homework assignment tonight. It's it's the first online response that you have besides Stilla's response. The online response where I want you to kind of picture being in this, society. And these cylinder seals were very important. They were kind of status symbols. But just like today we use stamps to stamp things, like put a stamp on something and mail it. They use cylinder seals the same way, to marking trade. So when something was purchased, boom, we can prove it was purchased, where it was purchased, who bought it. And they used these seals, but they were also status symbols because they had holes in the center of them. And we know that women would wear them as jewelry. So you had a family seal, and you could pass that on. The more important you were, the more important your cylinder seal was. They started with stamps, so just a disc, just a flat little round disc like a coin, and they would stamp that. Then it evolved into these cylinder seals, which are brilliant because they're very interactive. They're almost like a narrative piece, but on a really, really small scale. This is just shy of 2 inches tall, and this is one of the larger ones. They range from like a 1/4 inch to like 2 or 3 inches tall. They're not really, really big, but they had to work in reverse. They worked subtractively. So they took, in this case, this is a cylinder seal made of a very dense stone. They would also use, minerals or gems. And then, so they carved in reverse, reductively, right? Subtractively. And then they could roll this on a piece of clay. That's like the wax seal. So if you rolled this, it reverses the image and makes it raised. So instead of carved out, it looks like it's dimensional and it stands out on a really small scale. This is a beautiful example. I was going to see where this is located. This is a really important seal. You can go on eBay, you can buy one. The problem is a lot of these have now been faked. Of course, it's in the British Museum. I can't have knowledge. It's in the British Museum. This is a really
It always
important.
comes back to the
This is a really important one. It's showing us this banquet scene. Like, these are people that are not only like worshiping, but they're also like having a celebration. They're having a banquet. They're drinking wine and they're eating food and they're having a great time. They're singing. There's music. There's people sitting. There's people attending to them. Where these were found too in this tomb, there were multiple people buried with them, and they were easily identifiable, like singers, someone playing the harp, someone that was maybe their servant, someone that was, their chariot driver, and they all died at the same time. Wow, that's so cool that they all died conveniently at the same time so they could bury them together. No, what happened? What happened? So the king, like maybe the priest died, but also all of his servants died at the exact same time.
They killed them.
They killed them. They had to drink. Willingly, though. Willingly, they drank a liquid to die, to be buried with the person they served, the person they were with. And sometimes these were even people in positions. Like, it might be their cleric. It might be the person who wrote for them. And they chose to die at the same time so they could be buried too. Because they'd rather be buried with someone with a higher status than them than to be buried with someone in a lower status with them. Like, psh, don't take my chances, I'm gonna be very, so that's really cool, it's on a small scale. So your assignment tonight is, kind of looking at the vocabulary, the language, the visual language of what these cylinder seals are. What would that mean to today, right? How would you represent today in a cylinder seal? Well, how would you represent yourself? Donna, tell us what you did. She showed me hers, she already did it, it's cool.
I have it. Do you want me to just get that out?
Yeah, that'd be amazing. Oh, like I said, these are on eBay. You can buy one. You're not going to buy the one from the British Museum. They already got it. But the problem is some of these are just faked. But there was also a lot of just random farmers that would find these in their backyard, right? And there was also grave robbers that would dig up. So she drew what her.
That's me. There's a cat on the table, so I'm like painting or drawing the cat. There's a rug and it's Arkansas. There's a Monstera plant. I have like my degrees on the wall. There's a bug picture. There's a snake because I like all things plants, nature, and then there's like it's supposed to be a tapestry and it has my initials.
I love it. So this represents Donna, where she's from, what she likes to do, who she is, and
I
if
kinda
we.
did like corporate art style because that's fair. It's very basic.
It is, and it's like a simplification. You don't need a lot of detail because obviously you can't. Oh, I went back. You can't get a lot of detail in these. They're very
Small.
stylized, very small, become like symbols, like silhouettes, like in the Paleolithic art that we saw. But it's a way quickly of identifying what was important to them, what's important to you, how would you identify, what would you say is a way. And I think Donna, didn't give her a round of applause for volunteering to show us. She did a great job representing in a lot of symbolism to show us. You can't give us a lot of detail, but with a lot of great symbolism to show who she is, what she likes to do, and what she's already accomplished. So these cylinder seals were a way of marking, right, to show not just a picture, but to stamp out an official document. So it would accompany a written document, something you purchased, trade, an agreement, signing an agreement, and this is brought to us by the ancient Sumerians, but then other cultures did this as well. This is arguably one of the most important pieces in all of our history. It is mislabeled. It's a misnomer to call this a standard, but a standard is a sign or a flag that a group would carry into battle. That's a standard. And so the guy who found this, his name was Woolley, is his last name, the archaeologist who found this. In the 1920s, when this was discovered, this was on par of discovering King Tut's tomb in Egypt in the 1920s. And people were hooked. They were captivated by these things that were discovered in ancient Samaria that were 4,000 years old, that they had no idea they would be using these materials. And every museum across the globe wanted pieces of this ancient civilization that was way more advanced than people had originally given them credit for. This is where civilizations were born, where people first decided to live together. This is where, and they had been doing so for close to 2,000 years. This is also in the British Museum, because when Sir Woolley found it, he was working for the Brits, and he said, well, obviously we ought to keep this somewhere safe, not in Iraq. We're going to bring it back home. And if anyone wants to see it, come to the British Museum, which is an amazing museum, but it is problematic. I think it would be pretty cool if you could still see this in Ur, where it was from, in Iraq. But honestly, it's maybe more difficult for most people to get there. But the reason why this is so important, and we now believe that this was not a standard, but actually maybe part of a what? What does it look like that we already looked at? What?
The cylinder?
A cylinder? This one's huge though. This is,
A tomb.
what?
A tomb.
These are all great guesses. This is, look how big this is.
How was this?
A foot tall,
A narrative, a
7 feet
story of a
wide.
battle, something.
like the harp. A register,
Oh.
it's in registers, boom, boom, boom. and it was probably part of a musical instrument. Like maybe.
What?
Yeah, so whatever musical instrument sat on this, this was like a natural amplifier, just like the wooden box that this is sitting on, that would amplify the sound. And so look at these registers that are right here as part of this harp, right? Doesn't this kind of look similar to
So what
this?
is a register?
A register is a panel or a frieze. It's a way to organize the picture plane so we can see, okay, this is one section, this is another section, this is another section.
So it was not carried into battle?
It was not carried into battle. The guy who found it was like, okay, cool, imagine if this had a hole at the bottom. I'm gonna put a hole there. And then there was a pole in this hole. So I'm gonna put a pole in that hole and I'm gonna say, it was a standard, it's like a flag. Like that is like the least convenient. This thing's heavy. It's made of wood and lapis lazuli, shell, limestone, set into wood, set into bitumen, which is that asphalt tar-like substance that glued everything together. You know when they're doing a fresh road, right? And they're pouring that. It's hot and it's stinky, it's nasty, it's toxic. That's what sticks this together. It starts hot and liquidy and like glue, but it's really oily, it's black, and it's definitely set once it dries. These are intrinsically valuable because these were things that came from great distance. They didn't have red limestone in Ur. They didn't have lapis lazuli. They were getting this from other regions. So they had to trade for it. It has value. It was a commodity.
So it's not a standard. This wasn't made for battle.
It was not made for battle. And we call one side the peace side and we call one side the war side. That's also, we don't know for sure.
And
It's a nice story though. But
Are
we
you
don't know for
for
sure.
sure that it was for an instrument?
No, we're
Okay,
not
okay.
sure. But it's much more likely because it didn't even have a hole at the bottom. He imagined it had a hole at the bottom, so he made one. And he imagined it was on a pole, so he put it on a pole. Yeah. And that's why, like, in terms of like question things like the Socratic method, like we don't know for sure. Like when I was learning our history in the mid 90s, I know I'm old. I learned that the ancient Romans made the Capitoline wolf, and then they later discovered recently that it was made by, it wasn't made during Etruscan times, it wasn't made during Roman times, it was made during the medieval times, and they have direct evidence. So it's like that was wrong, and they printed it in the book as if it was fact, right?
Mm-hmm.
For the longest time in World War II, we talked about the painter Judith Leister, who studied with Franz Hals. Her paintings looked a lot like Franz Hals, but she signed them with her name, Judith Leister. And people said, yeah, but they're probably Franz Hals paintings. And they said that like it was fact, right? They're like, no way a woman painted that good. There weren't women painters back then. Like, yeah, I'm serious. So we don't know for sure, and so it's okay when we do know for sure. We know the date of this, we know where it was found. That's why the find spot is so important. But the reason this is called the war side is because it shows a kind of battle here, and this is an early version, the first known version of a chariot drawn by horse. It tells a story. Which I love about this is you see that there is a chariot here, a charioteer, here a dude like throwing spears at people, and the horses. Then here you see another, same deal, charioteer, he's about to throw a spear, the horse kind of galloping, and a dead dude underneath. And then again, dead dude, another guy about to get trampled. The hooves are like really frenetically, like almost flying. Is it 4 different charioteers and chariots and horses and dead dudes, or is it one showing motion, which is brilliant, right? If so, that's great. It's one of the first examples of showing a passing of time in a piece of art. And these are soldiers who are imprisoning their people who they just captured. These are captives. And then here at the top, this perhaps is the same charioteer who is now offering up those as potential new members of society. We're not going to kill them. Well, we killed some of them. We had to kill some of them. But hey, the horse did it, not me. The horse did it. But they're going to now become Sumerians.
I thought they
They're
were
us.
top bottom, but that
No,
looks like
they read top to bottom, but this kind of tells us more of a story bottom to top this way,
Yeah.
right? But here, who's this?
leader. I don't know.
Priest? King? Yeah, this is the
General?
ruler. This is the rulers. Like
Okay.
we believe this is the priest king. he's busting out the frame. I love this. If this is the frame, he's so big that he's busting out of it. It's called hierarchical scale, a hierarchy. The more important you are, the bigger you're shown. And so we can see hierarchical scale. He can't even be contained within this register. This beautiful little decorative element here, using the lapis lazuli, which is that blue, very beautiful ultramarine blue. And then here is what we see as the peace side of the standard of Ur. Here is that same priest, king, and here are his fellow priests that are kind of worshiping, following him. His servants are standing, and so are the musicians. That was that musician I showed you playing the harp, and the eunuch that's singing. They're the same height as he is, but they're standing and he's seated. So imagine if he stood up. And they have bare feet, which is important to note. Here we see animals, people organizing animals, farming animals, herding animals. Here we see this is some kind of a parade, a processional. We don't know for sure, but they could be processing to be part of this scene. We've nicknamed this the peace side. It shows a more kind of like banquet scene of people getting along versus this side is a little bit more telling a story of conflict or turmoil. So that's why it's nicknamed the war side. This is nicknamed the peace side. But who knows for sure what the narrative was? We do know that this would have been the most important person based on their scale. And again, I love these because it shows like all of these little borders, and then boom, that one had to be a little bit smaller. I love that. It was like, oops, ran out of room. Oh shit, I made him too big, ran out of room. No, that was done on purpose. That's brilliant. That's really cool. So now we have the Akkadians. The Akkad people came and conquered the Sumerians. They said, you guys got a good thing going. They were living as independent, Sumerians were living as independent city-states, and the Akkadians were living more as like, not quite a nation, but more of an organized, larger geographic area led by one king. And he said, we need more resources, we need more, and they spread past their area of the Euphrates, east of the Euphrates, and came to where the Fertile Crescent is, between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. And they conquered the Sumerians, and they adopted their language. So they spoke Akkadian, but they wrote in cuneiform, which is brilliant. And this is possibly the head of Akkadian ruler. This is a head of Akkadian ruler, but it is possibly Sargon, which Sargon was one of these really important early kings, a great ruler, very militaristic, was able to capture large areas. There's a written record, so we know these things. We've translated cuneiform from the Akkadian. They were a Semitic type people, so they spoke a language that's similar to Arabic, Hebrew, and look at this depiction of this King Sargon. He has a similar story as Moses, being raised by a foreigner and being like in a river, and then being raised by, and then became recognized as one of theirs, and then led those people similar to Moses. It's a great story. And he was adopted. I think this is a beautiful depiction. How do you think, when you look at this, how do you think this was made? So this is made of copper. How'd they make it?
You have to heat it up, don't you?
You have to heat it up, so we can't just take copper and chip away at it. That's true. They heat it up.
Cast mold?
Yeah, they made a mold. They made a cast. This is called a hollow form casting. It's a very difficult process. This is the earliest known example of hollow cast form. So what they do is, I mean, you can watch videos of this like on YouTube, and I've seen it on Instagram. I probably came from a TikTok video. Someone shared it on Instagram where they took aluminum foil and they kept just like making it more and more compact, and then they cut it up in pieces and they melted it down, and then they made like what's this game where you roll a ball and you throw it, and it has to go through a little. It has to go through like. It has to go through a little.
Like the arcade game?
No, it kind of is like that. It has to go through a little like metal hook in the ground. And you play it on the lawn.
Oh, croquet!
Croquet, yeah, but you do it without the croquet. You just throw it, you pitch it. And he made these out of there. So what you do is you take a form. Maybe this was made out of stone or clay. You take a form. You make the sculpture itself. So this is a description of the technique. This is a description of the technique of hollow form casting. that you might want to write down. I'm hinting that this is noteworthy.
Okay.
So you create the form first, and it would be out of like wood or clay. You make it entirely to look like Sargon here. Then what you do is you take sand and you tightly compact the sand and you put it around in a box, you put it around that form. Then you split, this is the part that's magic. You split that box in two. So it has two parts. It has a front and a back. It's like really difficult to do, but they figured this out. And it's tightly compact sand, and it has like the void. You take that object out, that wood or that clay object out, and you have those two halves, and you put that box back together. So now imagine there's a void. There's a negative space of where that clay or that wood form once was. And now you pour molten copper. Copper is really difficult to work with. Anyone that's done etching knows it's hard to scrape and make changes on copper. It is a really dense, hard metal. It has a higher melting point than other, like aluminum or alloys like zinc, melt much easier, right? So that form that was now a void, you've poured melted copper into it, and once it cools, you can take that form apart. And in theory, you could reproduce this. It's amazing. This is the earliest known example of hollow form casting, which we'll learn about the lost wax process, which is different than this, but it was based on this. So that became a more sophisticated and easier way. This is really difficult, but how do you describe the way that possibly, for the longest time we thought this was Sargon. Now we don't know because it may have predated his rule, or actually he might have predated when this was created. How do you think, what does this make you feel about Sargon, like a description of him, or maybe what he's like as a ruler?
Well, he was important.
Very influential.
I agree. What else?
Handsome.
He's a good looking dude. I think he's beautiful.
They made him look
Yeah.
really good.
He's good, and I think that maybe it looks like him. Maybe this is a portrait, but maybe it's an archetype too, right? Like the AI images right now are going hard on like. Okay, I'm not getting political. Okay, sounds like I am, but like Trump with like a bald eagle or something, like and they're gonna show him like.
They did Taylor Swift
Chest
during
out, shirt off
concert.
with a machine gun or something. Like, you're gonna look powerful, right? And I think he looks powerful, but I also think he looks beautiful. Do you think he looks like you could go just talk to him?
No.
No?
He looks dead.
He looks dead a little bit. I kind of think though, emotionally, does he have a certain kind of expression or emotion? If you had to put it, Riley.
I think he looks like just calm and like approachable. He looks nice to me.
Yeah, I kind of think he looks peaceful, calm, and approachable. I think I could have a beer with this dude, Like, I'm not afraid of him. Like those dudes with the bug eyes, Apache Beg, he doesn't feel as much like that. Do you notice something about his face now that probably didn't look like it when they originally created it?
His eye.
They've been gouged out, which is really difficult to do. So later when the Persians attacked and controlled this area, they knocked this over. So where it was found is not so it was made in Nineveh, and this was in the Temple of Ishtar, which Ishtar is like a shared Akkadian and Babylonian goddess of beauty and war, similar to Athena in the Greeks. This was not found there though, this was found in southern Iraq, where the Persians had toppled it, and left it over. Not too dissimilar today, honestly, when U.S. allied forces went into Iraq, what did they do?
Blow up everything.
They blew up everything and they knocked over all the statues of Saddam Hussein, right? Like, how dare they do that? We would never do that. Oh yeah, we did it. It's psychological warfare. It's literally a branch of the military that intentionally destroys stuff to.
Did you break the law?
Is it this one?
Yeah.
Okay.
It messes with the mind like, they got our dude. They got our dude. It already defeats you. Before you're
That's messed
defeated,
up.
you're already defeated. So this shows us that it had a value within its community, it had a value outside of that as well. This is another example similarly of something that was not the fine spot of this. This is so cool because when this was made, This was dedicated to Naram Sin. And Naram Sin is the grandson of Sargon. He was an important Akkadian king. He was known as being very nepotistic. That happens. Like he gave power to his own people and his relatives. But he was like a great militaristic organizer. He kicked butt. This is him kicking ass and conquering the lullaby people. Like he literally put them to sleep. He's like, I'm gonna sing you a lullaby people. And this artist who did this is amazing, by the way. This is 7 feet tall.
Whoa.
Taking a scale, we have no idea. This other one, this was about 3 feet tall. So looking at this versus this, like scale, massive, huge. So this is pink sandstone. Sandstone's a little bit easier to carve, but this is a depiction of Naram Sin, and it's showing him as a great militaristic leader because that's important. It's propaganda, so everybody knows like he is giving us power. We're Akkadians, we're proud to be Akkadians, and we can kick other people's ass. You can see here, he's bigger than everyone else, he's powerful. This was known as the Victory Stele. Mm-hmm. So, and then the later, when the Persians came in, this was found in modern day made, and this is kind of like in Saudi Arabia. This is, people recognize this as being so important that they said this was Naram Sin, and this is my name, and I've got it now 500 years later. That's just cool to think that they knew that I'm in the same lineage as Naram Sin.
Wow.
He was legendary as a king. And here you can see composite view because he's wearing this horned helmet, and he's kind of facing us, but also walking forward at the same time. The Egyptians used this kind of device. And here are his soldiers, and they're literally throwing out people. They're killing them. Here's a tree. They're taking prisoners. They're killing some. They're throwing them over the mountain here. This is a mountain. And here, this guy is begging for his life. Like, I'll become an Akkadian too. Just don't kill me. I'll become Akkadian. I don't need to be a lullaby anymore. And so he's like, this decides. So he's the judge as well. He's judging who's going to live and who's going to die. And this had at least 3 stars, these kind of symbolic stars. It may have had more because they're broken. It is, at one point became broken. This is on life scale. It is huge. It's massive. So the Sumerians never really died out. We mentioned the Akkadians kind of adapted and adopted some of their practices and kind of gave them a little bit of autonomy. When you're leading and organizing a large geographic area as opposed to just small city-states, it's difficult to control and keep everybody on the same page. So the Sumerians kind of continue to do their thing in certain regions like Sumer, where the Sumerians had settlements that persisted through the Akkadian rule. This is now about 500 years after the height of Sumerian culture. It comes back. So this is the Neo-Sumerian. So we have Sumerian, Akkadian, and then Neo-Sumerian, where they become powerful again. And this is a ziggurat. A ziggurat is a stepped pyramid. So this is probably the first Egyptian pyramids were made in the same way. They knew of each other. The Egyptians at this time were thriving. The Egyptians knew of the Mesopotamian culture and vice versa. So if you started to build, these were called mastabas, and they were built like this in Egyptian culture. And eventually it's a stepped sort of pyramid. What they realized is, if we close off this form right here, that looks pretty sick. That looks pretty good. And let's just go ahead and top it off like that. And we have a pyramid. And so these ziggurats, so many cultures have put prominence on mountains, right? Like Mount Sinai, Moses coming down with the law, talking to God. Mount Olympus, the Greeks and the pantheon of gods there. Ziggurats were a similar sort of legendary worship temple complex that very few people would actually get to experience. Imagine you are a modern day Sumerian and you're walking up to this. It strikes fear in your eyes, but you're standing down here as a worshiper, and the priest or priestess is at the top of this temple here. The temple would just be a rectangular structure at the top that only they could, and they literally called these waiting rooms. So the priest would go into the waiting room waiting for God. And you were down below worshiping. And they worshiped out of the temple, not inside of the temple. They had these staircases that wrapped around the building, and this particular axial view, so it has 4 corners. Did you know pyramids have 4 corners? You think about it, like a lot of times people think it's a triangle, it's got 3 sides, but a pyramid, if you look at the top of a pyramid, so it looks like this, and then from the side it looks like this, so we call that axial, and it has 4 corners. Same with this, so they face the cardinal points as well, north, south, east, west. And at the top would be the waiting room, the cella, C-E-L-L-A, and it has these 3 staircases, and none of them go directly to the top, so you have to take these steps, and so this one goes almost all the way to the top, this one doesn't quite go that far, this one goes all the way to the top, but you have to connect, so it makes it difficult. What's that?
What was the ring called? A cella?
Cella, C-E-L-L-A, and that comes to us from the Greek. So this is, we don't know what they called it, but it's come from the Greek cella, which is a waiting room. They're waiting for God. And they are, these would all be dedicated to different entities. So they weren't always worshiping all the same pantheon of gods. This was made of mud bricks. Remember I said this region didn't have a lot of resources. They had a lot of sand, like they do now, but it was also more fertile. They had ground. They didn't have stones. They didn't have a lot of wood. They didn't have, gold. They were trading for these things. So it was important to build this massive structure. And so they had to create their own stones. Very ingenious. They made mud bricks. They took the wet mud and then let it dry out in the sun till it became a brick, and then they built with that, which is a great strong material until it rains. So it's susceptible to erosion. Most of what you see, about 2/3 of what you see, is a modern day recreation of what was there. And you know who did it? Saddam Hussein. Love him or hate him. How do we know someone's good? We know he was good because he was a despotic leader. He was actually a terrible person. But he was in the process of trying to restore all of these things during his rule. The Babylonian were in a unique city-state in the same region. And this is just one of, I think, the most beautiful objects I've ever seen in all of our history. This is in the British Museum as well. But this was dedicated to the Queen of the Night, like Ishtar. And the Babylonians, like the Sumerians, were well organized, had their own pantheon of gods, and one of the most important kings of this Babylonian era is Hammurabi. We'll end here because we are out of time, but this shows us about 300 different laws. If you were Babylonian, you had to abide by them. Some of them are really random. Like if you throw someone into a river and they drown, we're going to drown you.
What?
If they survive, we're just gonna whip you. If you kill someone, you'll be killed. If you put out someone's eye, we'll put out your eye.
Yeah.
If you kidnap a woman and she's pregnant and her baby dies, your servant dies.
Oh.
If she dies, you die. It's really random, but I have the law code of Hammurabi. I'll bring it next time around. We'll continue this. But on Tuesday, we'll jump into chapter 3. Peace, seal. I look forward to seeing what you do for the online response. There's a normal writing part. It's about 300 words, not real long, but there's extra credits if you draw. See y'all.
No, she kept already first.
I'll give you opportunity to. Does anyone want to say goodbye to a woman of Willendorf before you leave? Like give her a good night kiss or anything before you go? Like hold her one last time. If you ever want to visit her, she'll be in the
I
office.
have a question. I love your outfit.
What's up, how's graphic design going? I got that form with me.
You just need to find it. It's starting to get wear and tear. You need a different thing.
And then do you have time later? I can take you over there and show you.
I mean, honestly, I think I have an idea because I know something.
And it's
just
and
in
it's
the
not
bubble.
keeping me warm.
Oh, okay.
Oh, maybe you're
I'll try
overreacting.
tomorrow, so
I
we'll
already
get it,
did.
but
I know you came here.
cool, I can,
Good.
yeah, I'll tell you the
Because
code.
freaking
Just
I
take
was
a look
calling
at that,
a,
read it and sign it, and then just get you later, okay?
I was trying to get
Oh, wait.
Schmidt a plane ticket because he doesn't have one. And I was literally on the phone with him for like an hour.
Yeah, someone else
And she
has
started
that.
making
I meant to
small
say
talk with me. And I'm like,
and,
I
Ma'am.
need
So it's like
to
you do
get
the
to
writing
class.
and you
And
do
she's
the
like,
thing,
oh,
and then you get
like,
extra
what are
credit.
you studying for? And I'm like,
Is that fair?
I just want my ticket.
That is so
Yeah.
good, I love that. That would be dope as
And
That
I
would
was
drive me
like,
I think
crazy.
you need to
Are
do
you
that.
gonna help me or not?
yeah, literally.
Yeah. You're gonna be
Thank
blessed.
you all. I appreciate the energy
Because I was
and
trying to
everyone
get
sharing and talking, it's great.
It was gonna
I'm serious, all the
cost
discussions have been good, what do you think?
$800.
I love it.
Yeah.
Sometimes people
I
just.
don't know.
I feel like I'm trying to work on not interrupting while you're speaking.
Please do.
Work in
Alright.
progress.
Where he
Just
leaves
raise your hand.
later,
Or interrupt
like
me.
if they're
I'm
sooner
okay
than
with it.
me.
See
So
y'all.
he'll be like, not qualified as me, but
Bye.
he'll get to the same destination as me. So
Yeah.
it's just so annoying.
Flights are so awful.
I hated it.
I love flying, but the whole process is so stressful.
And now I don't have any money in my savings for like school next semester because I've had to cover all of this. And it's been all on me. But I know I'm gonna get paid back. I just don't know when.
Yeah,
So,
I'd be like, I need y'all to hurry up on that.
Do you have something now?
Cause I can't just
Yeah.
use my credit card. I don't
Sorry.
want to max it out.
Fine.
I should have
Save
said,
your
like, I'll
ground,
be
get your
free.
money.
I have class from 1 to 3 and
Mm-hmm.
I have a meeting now and then I'm leaving for lunch and yeah, so.
Could I ask you something?
But I
real
can,
quick?
if you want, like, I can stop by your class. If
I'm gonna
my
be
class
there.
goes from 1 to 2:52.
Okay.
See ya.
I'm gonna be there.
Awesome, me too.
Could
See
I
ya.
ask you something real
Sure,
quick?
yeah, no problem.
I didn't get the full thing for the hollow form casting. I got
Oh, okay.
create
Yeah.
form first, take sand and tightly compact it, and then put form in box and put the sand around it.
So then you cut it in half. You cut it in half so that has 2 parts.
Cut the
a
box
front-
in half.
Yeah, so it has a front and a back of that compact sand. So
Okay, and then